Want to make sure that it's recording. Oh, there it goes. Okay.
Would it pick
Yep.
me up from that distance?
Oh yes, definitely. Okay, I want to get Toshi too. Hi Toshi.
Hi.
How are you? Thank you for being here. My dad. And there's Pete. Okay. We'll start. Pete, could you just tell me what made you start cleaning up the Hudson? What made you start thinking about making that dump? It used to be a dump down in Beacon, right?
Yeah.
It was a dump for years.
You have to start earlier.
Okay.
I had a job on Cape Cod once,
Mm-hmm.
and at midnight a teenager took me out and taught me what fun it was to sail.
Right.
And it was a revelation to me. Now I realize why millionaires spend so much money on yachts. It's a game with the wind and the waves. It's not how fast you go, it's the fact that you move at all. The wind can be coming from the north, but if you zigzag northwest, northeast, northwest, northeast, use the very power of the north wind against you to move north. And I got a little plastic boat. I persuaded the family to let me buy a little plastic boat, and I started learning to sail here on the Hudson. And I looked down and see what I was sailing through, lumps of this and that with the toilet paper,
Mm-hmm.
and the phrase private affluence, public squalor came. John Galbraith thought of that phrase.
Mm-hmm.
And then a friend of mine in Cold Spring, Vic Schwartz, his parents used to run a drugstore in Beacon 100 years ago.
Okay.
And he said, oh, they used to have boats on the Hudson with a boom 70 feet long. Oh, I said, don't give me that. Never was only an America's Cup racer. Was that big. He said, no, I got a book about them. And it's this book which really started off the Clearwater Project.
Wow.
It was written by a member of the Verplanck family. They named
Right.
Verplanck Avenue
Yes.
after them.
I remember the house, Dad. He used to take us to the Verplanck house.
And actually Bill Verplanck was on the committee that built old St. Luke's Church way back in 1885.
Wow.
But 26 years later, in the year 1907, he couldn't resist the temptation to write a book called Sloops of the Hudson. He wrote it with a friend of his who was a sloop captain. Bill liked to sail, and he'd sailed on sloops, but his friend Moses Collier, who lived up in Chelsea, had been a commercial sloop captain, sailing Hudson River bricks to build New York, Catskill lumber to build New York,
Right.
hay for New York's horses. And this book wasn't great literature, but it was full of love.
Right.
They said these were the most beautiful boats we ever knew, and they'll never be seen again. They used to carry passengers in their early days. Alexander Hamilton rode a sloop from New York to Poughkeepsie. That's where the New York legislature was discussing whether or not to vote for the Constitution. Right. And Hamilton argued, said, the Constitution won't suit everybody, it's full of compromises, but we need a Constitution to hold this country together.
Right. Right. So that's what started it all, Pete?
And it's that book which started it.
Right. Right.
One book was about accidents. Right down near Cold Spring, they call it, the Dutch call it the water gut, which means the weather hole, the weather gut.
Right.
Because from the storm came down past West Point, the wind can come down from above and hit the boat before you see it rippling on the water. Usually you can see a wind coming
Right.
by the ripples on the water.
Right.
But there can be completely unexpected wham, and over the boat goes.
Yeah.
There's the bones of many a sloop
Right.
in the mud there.
Didn't you try and build a sloop, Pete? Remember that big log? I remember a huge tree trunk. And Dad, you would take us down, and there had to be the canoe.
That was a canoe, honey.
Right. What was the story behind the canoe that you were carving?
I can tell you how not to build a duggan.
Okay.
The first mistake I made was to carve the outside first.
Okay.
I should have burnt out the inside. What the Indians did was make a very little channel in one place.
Right.
And put some dry kindling in it and feed the dry kindling, and pretty soon it's a little hole.
Oh, wow.
Now with sticks, you make the hole longer,
right,
and wider, and then you have a long stick with a rag on it you can dip in water. When you want to slow it down, not burn it anymore, then you
right, you tame the fire with that.
Stop the fire here, but build it up there.
Right, right.
If I had done that, I would have dried the wood out. As it was, the wood was still, it was a green log, full of water. And when we got the outside carved, we were in the middle of, we hadn't even started the inside, and it started to crack, because the outside wanted to dry,
right.
The inside was wet.
Oh, okay.
Now, if the inside had been dry first, then it would not have checked.
Would that canoe have required outriggers? Were they or would it have?
No, the original canoes, they also pushed it out while they were burning it. And so the center of the canoe, instead of going up like this, would be out like that.
Right. So it never got into the water, the canoe.
This is a separate thing. What actually started the Clearwater was this book.
Right.
And I couldn't resist the temptation. One night, just a wild idea, I said, Vic, why don't we get some people together to see if we could build a replica? Nobody we know has that kind of money. It would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
But if we got enough people, my original idea was have 20 or 25 clubs at different places in the river, and each of them would raise some money, and each of them would learn to sail, and they'd sail it for 1 week a year. But it was an impractical idea. But then, Scenic Hudson had started about 2 years early. They're trying to stop the power plant on the Storm King. And a businessman in Cold Spring, Alexander Saunders, said to Vic, do you know this guy Seeger? Do you think he'd give a fundraising concert for Scenic Hudson? Vic asked me, and I said, yes, I'd be glad to. Now Saunders goes to New York to the board of directors. And down there he was told, don't touch Seeger with a 10-foot pole. 6 years he was condemned to jail because he wouldn't cooperate with the House Un-American Activities Committee. If we have anything to do with him, we will be tarred with the same brush. So Saunders came back and said, Vic, they turned me down, but I'd like to hear some music. Maybe you can raise money for something else. And Vic says, well, Pete and I have been talking about raising money to build a Hudson River sloop. Oh, that sounds interesting. And 2 months later, I'm singing for 150 people on the lawn of Alexander Saunders and his wife down on old Route 9. It goes from the Bird and the Bottle,
I know where you are.
the little windy dirt road.
Yes.
That was the original
Yes.
Albany Post Road.
There's even a monument up there, isn't there?
Yeah. Benjamin Franklin and his teenage daughter laid it out in 1764.
And the stones are still, the milestones are still on it.
You know, milestone, Peekskill 8 miles, Fishkill 6 miles.
You know, this is, I've often wondered, why did they build that road on the top of the ridge rather than down where the present Route 9 is in the valley, Palmerston? This road is pretty much on the ridge.
Tell you why. It's hard to build a road on the side of a mountain. In the bottom of the mountain, it gets flooded in the spring.
All right. Gotcha.
And this is quite common. When I was a kid in Connecticut, there was what they called the Norwich Post Road. It ran from Litchfield 18 miles up to Norwich, Connecticut. And I know that because a girl and I decided to hike it. It was a muddy day, but at least the road was there.
Yeah, but if it was in the valley, it would have been impossible.
It would have been underwater.
Gotcha.
So quite often, there's also a road on the top of Blueberry Ridge between Pequag and Wingdale. I once worked at a blueberry farm there, Hamill's Blueberry Farm, and on the top of that ridge was, for 10 miles or more, if you went up towards Chatham, there was this dirt road which might have gotten wet, but it didn't get flooded.
That makes sense. The sloop itself now, where did you find the plans? First of all, where did you get that?
At Alexander Saunders' farm, we passed a hat and raised all of $150. But in the intermission, in Reese Saunders' living room, she's still living in her 90s, she's almost 100. In Reese's living room, about 15 or 18 people met. Might have been more, could have been 20. And I talked for 3 minutes about the sloop, and we thought we'd build one. And we voted to call it, our little organization, the Hudson River Sloop Restoration, Inc. nonprofit. Mm-hmm. And one of the 15 was a lawyer. He said he'd get us 301c3 status from the government so we could collect money and not have to pay taxes on it.
Right.
And we thought we'd charge $10 for anybody who wanted to join us. From there on, it was step by step. Saunders was a good organizer, and he was the president. I was the chairman, but it was just a figurehead job. I had one vote like everybody else.
Right.
Dom Presutti, across the river, was a young man, and he was a friend of Vic's. He said, if we have anything to do with Seeger, we'll never get anywhere. Seeger doesn't know how to work with the establishment. And he resigned.
Wow.
Well, I resigned as chairman and said, if people feel this way, but I've remained a member. On the condition that whoever plays their $10 got a vote once a year on who's going to be on the board of directors. And up till that time, the board of directors just voted for itself.
Right.
And then in 1968, we laid the keel. We only had $20,000. We found, I know about it, this is the interest. I wrote a letter to the New York Historical Society, never got an answer. Wrote to the Smithsonian, they have a very good maritime department, never got an answer.
Wow.
I wrote to Mystic, Connecticut, that tourist place,
Right.
and got a very nice answer. Dear Mr. Seeger, we think you have a wonderful idea. We have in our library plans for sloops, and we think we know somebody who might like to try adapting them to modern conditions. And they found a man named Cyrus Hamlin. He's my age, still alive, living up in Kennebunk. And he did for us what most people would have charged $60,000, but he only charged us $6,000.
Wow.
And he worked with the Coast Guard, because the Coast Guard says if you're going to take passengers out, we have to approve the design.
Right.
The old sloops were completely flat bottom, so they could sit in a mud bank at low tide
Right.
until the tide rose, and then they'd float away. But the Coast Guard said you got to put a V bottom on it for more terminal stability. So when it blows over, it will
Right.
pull it,
Bounce back up.
the weight in the
Right.
bottom. where the completely flat boat will stay over.
Right, right.
And in October of '69, we launched. Toshi sprinkled some Hudson River water on the keel up there in South Bristol, Maine.
Right.
And 2 weeks before, we used the ski slope building. We needed for about 100 people were now members of the Clearwater, and we voted to call it Clearwater.
Right.
It was a close vote because almost half the people wanted to call it Heritage. They said, no, we don't want to get involved in environmental confrontation. It'll make for bad feeling. Let's dress the sailors in costume like they did on the Mayflower and call it Heritage.
Right.
And Heritage lost to Clearwater by only about 5 votes.
Wow.
But the young people went ahead and they changed whatever you call our Constitution, saying the purpose of the Clearwater is to help clean up the Hudson.
Right.
Pete, was all this done before or after the awareness of the PCB problem?
Before.
So the PCB became...
Shortly before.
Okay.
So how did you get the companies, Pete, to stop the dumping in the Hudson?
Well, this is interesting. There was a Democratic governor before Cuomo.
Kerry?
What?
Kerry?
Kerry. And he appointed the son of a very rich family, Ogden Reed, to be the person. They didn't call it environmental there, but it was basically the environment, nature, what it was, conservation, that is.
Right.
Department of Conservation. And Reed had gone up to Albany to look over the office and see what it was like. And he went into some files and leafed through it, and he found a bunch of reports, recent reports, by a man named Ward Stone, who was in charge of examining wildlife. And Stone says, how come this wildlife has got more and more PCB in it? Fish, animals, and so Ogden Reed now calls up Richard Revere, who was a New York Times reporter and lived in Newburgh.
Yes.
I don't know if he's still living.
Yeah, he wrote a biography of McCarthy, didn't he?
Might have, I don't know. At any rate, Reed said, Richard, Dick, what's this PCB stuff? Oh, it's very dangerous, Mr. Commissioner. It's very poisonous. Well, do you think I should let the public know about it? Commissioner, you just have to let the public know about it. She telephoned me. Don't expect me to keep it silent. So, there was now an article in the Times.
Okay.
And I think that might have been when Clearwater was just built.
Right.
And we didn't know for sure how we were going to pay for it.
Right.
In the month of May 1969, the hull was launched, and Pat Egan and Toshi and a whole lot of others.
Just died.
Yeah. They went up there with enough food for a couple hundred people, but there were 2,000 people there.
Oh.
How they got the extra food, we don't know. They made telephone calls, and people in the little town of South Bristol made telephone calls, and somehow we fed everybody, and the thing slid into water with a big splash, and our son had a movie camera, and filmed it. The captain-to-be was on the taffrail, leaning over so he could see it splash into the water. The captain had golden curls to his shoulder, and when the people in Main saw him, said, "This is a captain?" When the boat had sails on it, we sailed into it. I said to one of the workers, "You want to come out on a sail in this boat you built?" He said, "I would if you had a captain." He couldn't believe that Alan Oliver was a captain. He was a very good captain.
So after this time, Pete, when did you start noticing the river getting cleaner?
We have a testing department, and we work with the health departments. And one of them one of our board of directors decided to start an annual swim around Manhattan.
Right.
32 miles. How do you swim it? You swim with the tide, which is a very fast tide up the East River. 4 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour. It's a very fast tide.
Right.
And you stay on the west side, so the moment you hit the Harlem River, if you use the calendar right, the Harlem River is also going north, maybe 2 miles an hour.
Right.
Right up to Spike.
Then you get up to Spike and Duyvil, and if you time it right, you've got the Hudson River going 3 miles south.
That's a great deal of synchronization.
So they can swim around the Hudson in about 5 or 6 hours.
That's quite amazing.
Wow.
To go around 32 miles.
That's quite amazing. Do they still do that, Pete?
They still do. Now, back then, when they first started, they had to take about 5 inoculations against this, against that.
Right,
against
right.
Things. And now they have 1 inoculation, I believe.
That's progress.
That's great.
However, up here, we don't need to take any inoculation.
Right.
The health department tested, and it's safe for. There's a very, very small amount of PCB in the water.
Pete, but those samples we took for the pool, remember the floating pool?
Yeah.
Did they prove to be free of PCBs?
It was so free. I asked the Poughkeepsie Health Department, how free is it? He said, well, he said the parameters are, if over 200, it's not safe to swim in. But you're down around 20.
Oh, that's great.
If it was less than 10, it'd be safe to drink.
Wow.
Peter, your voice isn't natural. You're forcing it.
Yeah.
Talk in your natural voice.
Oh, you won't be able to hear
She
me.
can move up.
Well, I think it's picking it up. I think it's okay.
That's it now.
Yeah. Is it straining your voice though, Pete? Is it?
It
I don't have to
just,
say
it just
it.
sounds funny.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound natural.
One more question I have. This dredging of is that successful? Is that doing to get the stuff out of the sediment?
It is, but they should have started it long ago. The PCBs were dumped at Fort Edward, and there was a little dam there. But the town of Fort Edward started taxing the dam, and GE wanted to save a few dollars, so they tore the dam down. And now all the PCBs went down to Troy.
Right.
There's another dam at Troy, and at the moment, most of the PCB is held behind the dam at Troy. But every year a little goes over it.
Right. Seeps
Every
into the
year
river.
more goes over the dam.
Right.
So there was an article in the Harper's Magazine about 2 months ago saying PCB will never be completely out of the river. Now, never is a long time. That's eternity. That's God. And my guess is that there'll be very small amounts, but how big the amounts are, I didn't read the article in detail.
Wow.
But they have a new kind of dredging. It's like a vacuum cleaner, and you put like a shoebox, a huge shoebox, 50 or 70 feet long and 40